So we're in a new month. We're in the month of December called the greatest gift. And so you might be wondering why I'm starting off with the challenge of fear. Because it doesn't sound much like a gift, does it? But it is, really. The challenge of fear is a gift because fear teaches us so many things and it evolves us in ways that we couldn't grow if we were just in bliss all the time. There was in 1993, there was a book that was published called The Lovables in the Kingdom of Self-Esteem. Isn't that just delightful? It was a children's book. It was uplifting. It was all bright and shiny. It was a new way to tell fairy tales to children with none of the darkness, It was just all about the light. And it was marketed to us parents in those Mommy and Me classes I used to take my kids to as the right kind of book to be teaching your children from. Nothing dark, nothing scary, nothing threatening or frightening, nothing that would give them bad dreams. And sometimes kids need that. They need those dark and scary and stormy things in order to come to terms with, their own shadow side, because they have them. They have those thoughts. And some fairy tales really are scary. They really, really are scary. And some children's rhymes and fairy tales are misinterpreted. And they're not scary at all, but they have gotten a scary reputation. Take, for example, the old lady who lived in the shoe. Do you remember that child rhyme? There was an old lady who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do. She gave them all broth without any bread. She whipped them all soundly and put them to bed. And my God, we were horrified, weren't we? We were just horrified. That old lady's a sadist. My God, could you imagine? Now, my Grammy D was a wise old woman, and she came from a seafaring family. They came from Holland in the 1600s, landed on Staten Island. They were oystermen and sailors and sea captains and pilots, and they made their fortune from the sea. And my Grammy explained a few things to me about this whole whipping them soundly thing. And it turns out it's all okay, because what it was about the rope that tied up ships. When you cut a length of rope, those big fat ropes, and they would begin to fray at the end. And in order to keep them from fraying, the sailors would take a small bit of rope, and they would wind it around and around and around and around and around the end, and they would tie it off, and that was called whipping. They were whipping the end of the rope. Now, translated over to childcare, what they did in those old drafty houses back on the Northeast when everybody was freezing in the wintertime, is they would take the blankets and they would wrap the blankets around the little infants, and then they would take a separate piece of blanket and wind it around the baby so the baby couldn't come out of the blankets, couldn't kick them off while they were asleep. And that was called whipping them. Whipping them soundly meant doing a really, really good job of it, so that the children couldn't come out of their blankets and catch their death of cold, like we thought that was going to happen years ago. So that was the rhyme. See, it all came out right. It wasn't really a beating that they were getting. They were being just tied into their blankets so that they couldn't catch cold. So some things may sound dark and scary to us from the old days, and we just have misinterpreted them. Some fairy tales are dark and scary. And it was a way of allowing children to come to terms with that shadow nature, because they have it. They have dark and scary thoughts. Children have those ideas in their heads. We don't put them in there. Take, for example, the Brothers Grimm. Boy, it didn't get darker and scarier than the Brothers Grimm. They had about 170 fairy tales that they put together back in the 1800s. And take, for example, Hansel and Gretel. Now, Hansel and Gretel, lost in the woods, find the witch in the gingerbread house. Okay. But the beginning of that story, Mom convinced Dad to take the kids into the woods and abandon them there because they didn't have food to feed them. See, we don't hear that part of the story. But that's how they came to be in the woods to begin with. Mom was just, get rid of these kids. We can't afford to feed them anymore. Snow White. In Snow White, it wasn't the evil stepmother. We created that. It wasn't the wicked stepmother. It was her own mother who told the huntsman to take her out in the woods and kill her and bring back her heart because Mom was too jealous. The daughter was too pretty, prettier than Mom. So she was going to get rid of the daughter. And in Cinderella, they don't show you this in the Disney movie, but in Cinderella, the stepsisters were told to cut off their own toes to fit into the glass slipper. That's what mom told them to do. So there's some really dark and weird things. You know, there were a couple of stories actually that were dropped altogether from the Brothers Grimm stories. There was a delightful little Brothers Grimm fairy tale called Children Playing at Slaughtering. And it was left out of the subsequent Grimm's fairy tales. It involved children playing. One played a butcher, one played a pig. You see where this is going? Okay, the story ends with one of the boys killing his brother, and the mother becomes so enraged that she, in turn, kills the surviving son by stabbing him through the heart. She becomes even more upset when her last surviving child dies by drowning in the bathtub that she hangs herself. The end. So they dropped that one from the Brothers Grimm fairy tales altogether, okay? So you can see how dark they really can get and frightening for children. Now, Bruno Bettelheim, who wrote the book The Uses of Enchantment, discussed the use of fairy tales in the lives of children and how it can be a good thing. How using some of those dark and scary stories give children the opportunity to work through their own shadow side, to work through those feelings that they do have as children. You know, your siblings get into a fight and the one kid says to them, "I hate you," and mom steps in right away and goes, "Oh, you don't mean that." Well, you know what? They do. In that moment, they do hate their sibling. And so it gives them an opportunity to really come to some sort of peace with those dark feelings that they have. You know, and Bruno Bettelheim said other things. Of course, he lost a lot of credibility toward the end of his life, and he wound up committing suicide too. But that's its own dark little fairy tale, isn't it? But he was right about this idea that we cannot shield and shelter children from the scary stuff. They already have the scary stuff. They know about it. They think about it. They think about, oh my God, what would happen if Daddy left? Or what would happen if Mommy abandoned us? Or those fears are in there. Those shadow sides or thoughts are there. And fairy tales, expressing fairy tales and coming to terms with the dark side and understanding that, oh, they're not alone in those feelings, are a very supportive way for children to integrate them into their daily lives. You know, just shielding them from it totally, not allowing them even to have a scary story, doesn't mean that they won't ever think those things. So changing the words, or the songs of children, and or keeping them away from any dark references is, kind of like what we call a spiritual bypass. Just, oh no, I'm not hearing it's not hot. The religious scientist in hell. I'm not hearing it's not hot. No, we can't just deny that. It's almost like we have a superstition in New Thought. It's like, oh my God, don't say that word, or don't think that thought, or erase, because we're going to manifest it. No, we're not. It's not about denying the conditions. Ernest Holmes said we don't deny the conditions. We stand in the midst of the condition and we declare a greater truth. We declare a greater truth for ourselves. We can let our minds entertain that darkness and know it's not the truth of us. We have to see conditions for what they are. They're temporary. They're just temporary things that transform in our lives. There is a saying in New Thought that says, "What we resist persists." Right? You've heard of that. What we resist persists. What we accept, we can transform. We can transform. So when we stand in the middle of it, we can stand in the middle of hell and proclaim heaven. No, there is a greater truth to be known. Ernest Holmes said this: whatever you identify yourself with, you become like. Whatever you resist, until you make it a reality, you will also become like. Therefore, resist not evil, and it will flee from you. Don't fight your fears, see through them. There is nothing in God's world to be afraid of. There is nothing in God's world to be afraid of. So looking at these scary thoughts, these scary things, don't necessarily make them so. We stand in hell and declare heaven. We stand in hell and declare heaven. That is our practice. Stand in hell, whatever it is in the moment, whatever that thing is, that situation is, that undesirable condition is, and declare and demand heaven. So fear. What is that purpose of fear in our life? What is it? Sometimes I think it's there to get our attention. Where are we unconscious? What part of our lives are we unconscious? Just like those fairy tales. What are we afraid of? What are we afraid of? It is our purpose to then overcome that, to transcend those self-imposed limitations, because that's what fear is. It's a self-imposed limitation. So we are here to grow beyond those fears. We don't collect fears to keep them. We collect fears for them to get our attention so that we can work through them. We don't want to stay stuck in our fears. When we stay stuck in our fears, it limits our experience of life. We're here to grow past them. We are not here to be subject to them. Subject to limits our experience of life. It's like being it's constricting as opposed to expansive, right? Our fears shut us down and keep us from experiencing things. We are only born with two fears. We're only born with two fears, the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. That's it. The Moro reflex that they do in little babies, I don't know if you've ever seen that when they're first born, they take their fingers and the little babies grasp onto them and they lift them up a little bit, and then you get that shock response. The babies will go, oh, because that's the Moro reflex. They're afraid of falling. And then, of course, the other fear we're born with is loud noises. Drop a pot on the floor, see what happens. They do the same thing. It's shock and surprise. So we're only born with those two fears, and we can resolve those too. But it's not for us to then keep collecting fears along the way. Those fears, whatever they are, that pop up because of an experience we had with a big barking dog or a loud noise or flying or whatever, they are there to get our attention, to find out where we need that healing, and then to do the work of healing. They're not here to be just stuck to us for the rest of our lives. Ernest Holmes in Help for Today said this, excuse me, he said, there is no need to fear anything in this life if we believe that, called on or not, God is always present. Called on or not, God is always present. If we believe that we have available at all times the wisdom that created this universe and which can and will overcome anything that disturbs us, we shall never be afraid. Fear constricts us. Fear makes us live a smaller and smaller life. We keep eliminating things and eliminating things. I can't fly because I'm afraid. I won't go to the beach. Sharks, I can't fix the roof because I'm afraid of heights. I can't go to Carlsbad Caverns because I'm claustrophobic. Right? Anybody here afraid of snakes? A couple of people. Okay, so you're afraid of snakes, but you're not run screaming from the room, die of a heart attack right here in the room, kind of afraid of snakes. You're just afraid of snakes? Oh, good. Okay, that's a good thing. Because, because sometimes we use our fear to stop us from what we want, Sometimes we use our fears to stop us from doing things. We say, I would really love to, but, I'd really love to, but. Now, Rainier Maria Rilke said this. She said, perhaps everything that frightens us is, at its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love. Don't you love that? Okay, so I want to introduce somebody. Come out here. Here you go. Now, this is Arnold. Isn't he cute? Oh, he's real. Yeah, he's real. This is Arnold, and he came to live with us back in 1990. I don't even remember. He came to live with us as a little bit. You know what? If they see this video down at CSL, they're going to go wild. They're going to lose their minds. Oh my God, Vision's snake handling now. They've gone totally off the rails. Oh my, that'll be so funny. We got to send them this video. Okay. Anyway, Arnold came to visit us, or stay with us, actually, live with us when he was a little dude. He's still little. He's a whitewater rosy boa. And back during 2003, he was with us. He had been with us for a couple of years. The electricity went out during the Cedar fires. Do you remember that? Oh, there was no electricity for days and days in East County. And during the fire, my son Avery, whose snake it is, would carry him around. I told him, he's got to stay warm. He's got to stay warm because snakes need the warmth. And so his hot rock didn't work, his heater in his cage didn't work because there was no electricity. So there's little Avery, and he's carrying the snake around, carrying him around. After about 3 days of carrying him around, he got a little tired, and he said, "Mom, I really need a break from Arnold. Can you carry him around for a while?" And I thought, okay, something helpless that wants our love. That's really all it is, something helpless that wants our love. And so I had no fear of snakes, and so I was holding him and walking and holding him and walking, and after a while, I couldn't do what I needed to do either. I understood what he meant. I couldn't wash the dishes. I couldn't make dinners. I couldn't do the things that I needed to do in those days. So he was a lot smaller in those days, and so I just stuffed him down in my bra. And he really did cuddle up really so nicely because he loved the warmth, and he fell asleep, and he just stayed there, and he was just as happy as could be. So he snuggled down, he went to sleep, and oh, no, but you can't take the microphone. So that's Arnold's story. And then the electricity came back on and he was fine. But what could there possibly be to be afraid of? What could there possibly be to be afraid of? Something that needs our love. It's something that needs our love. He was just cold and he was sad. I guess if snakes get sad, I don't even know. But he got warm and he got happy, I know that. And he went to sleep. And so what is there calling you to be greater than? Because I think sometimes that's what fear is, right? Fear is there to get our attention. What is it you need to grow beyond? What do we need to grow beyond? What is it that wants us to be bigger? What is it that wants us to recognize our greater self? That greater self that can transcend those fears because they're self-limiting. That's what fear does. It is limiting our lives. And faith is the antidote to that. Faith is the antidote to fear. They're two sides of the same coin, and the coin is simply the outpicturing of what is. Fear is simply faith that everything's going to go wrong. That's all it is. And faith is the faith that everything is going to go right. But it's the same energy. Fear says no. Faith says yes. It's that simple. Fear says we cannot have what we desire. Fear says I'm not good enough or young enough or educated enough or tall enough. Tall enough. Someone said I wasn't tall enough to be a minister once. That was funny. Anyway, faith says with God all things are possible. Faith says with God all things are possible. Ernest Holmes said this. He said, "Fear and faith are identical. It is the same energy used in one as the other, since there is but one energy in the universe, and this final energy is the energy of thought. Fear is a positive acceptance that you will experience that which you dislike. Faith is a positive acceptance that you shall experience that which you do like. But they are identical mental action. The only difference is the direction." We must not let fear shut us down or turn us away from our goals, our life, our full self-actualization and self-expression as human beings. We must not let fear shut us down. All this stuff going on in the world today is because fear is stronger than faith right now in people. People are afraid. They're afraid of the economy. They're afraid of each other. They're afraid of African-American men. They're afraid of cops. They're afraid. It's all fear. It's all fear. The killings, the war, the bigotry, the violence, the racism, the homophobia. All of it is fear. It is fear in one form or another. Fear of the other. Fear of I don't know them. Fear of they're not in my tribe. I don't know who they are. It's all their fault. They're the reason we're not happy. They're the reason we're not wealthy. They're the reason whatever. We're not fulfilled or satisfied or secure. Ernest Holmes said this in Creative Living. He said, "What is war? Fear. What is hatred? Fear. What is intolerance? Fear. Fear of what? Of the world we live in and of God. Fear arising partly out of the past and partly out of contemplation of the future, because the past is largely molding the consciousness of today. When we keep looking backward, in the rearview mirror, we can't possibly create a more loving future. You know, Ernest Holmes always said, principle is not bound by precedent, which means that nothing that came before this moment can interfere with the new thought we have today. That new thought we have today will change tomorrow. So it is up to us to step boldly into our faith, to step boldly into our future, to manifest right here and right now that faith is who we are. It is the challenge of fear that makes us look frightened and small and constricted. And we must not go into that spiritual bypass and say, you know, I'm not here and it's not hot, you know, well, or Arnold isn't here. And you know, we can't do the spiritual bypass. We have to do the work. We can't simply deny the conditions and just pretend it's all pretty. We have to come to terms with the condition. We have to stand in the midst of hell and declare a greater truth is known. We don't deny the conditions. We transform them. We transform them. We stand in hell and we shout heaven. We proclaim it. We must let fear call us to what needs to be done. Something helpless that wants our love. That's what fear is, like Arnold. Something helpless that wants our love. So the challenge of fear always calls us to love. It always calls us to love. It always calls us to live. It always calls us to be bigger than we thought we could ever possibly be. Are we up to the challenge? Yes. Thank you so much.